Don't answer the door. The storm came faster than expected. Jeremy had planned this solo cabin trip for months. No phone calls, no emails, just him, a fireplace, and a pile of books. But now the snow was relentless. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The fire crackled softly in the dimly lit room. Jeremy took a sip of his coffee, glancing at the clock. 11:42 p.m. Then, a knock at the door. His heart skipped. He wasn't expecting anyone. The nearest town was miles away. Another knock, louder. Jeremy set his mug down, creeping toward the peephole. His stomach twisted. There was no one there, just snow swirling in the darkness. Then, 3 more knocks, harder, faster. Jeremy's pulse pounded. Who the hell was out there? He grabbed a flashlight, cracked the door open just an inch, and shined the beam into the night. Nothing. The wind whistled through the trees. Jeremy exhaled, locking the door. Just the wind, he muttered. Then, a voice, right outside. Please, let me in. Jeremy froze. The voice was flat, emotionless. And worst of all, it sounded exactly like him. His legs locked up, his skin went ice cold. Slowly, he backed away. The doorknob rattled. Jeremy grabbed the fire poker, his breath shallow. Go away, he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. Silence. Then, the whisper came from inside the cabin, right behind him. But I already am. Jeremy spun around, but the cabin was empty. The fire flickered, shadows danced on the walls. His own reflection in the window smiled. By morning, the storm had cleared. The cabin was empty. The search team never found Jeremy, just a single set of footprints leading out into the snow, and a whisper in the wind. Please, let me in. Her favourite barista. The first time Jake noticed her, she was just another customer. She came into the coffee shop where he worked almost every morning, always ordering the same thing, an oat milk latte, extra foam. She was polite, quiet, never caused trouble. But then she started coming in twice a day, then 3 times. At first, Jake thought nothing of it. Plenty of regulars came in daily. Then, one afternoon, she slid a note across the counter with her payment. I love how you smile at me. He glanced up, forcing a polite grin. She just stood there, staring, waiting for him to respond. He muttered a quick, thanks, and moved on to the next customer. That night, when he closed up, she was outside, standing across the street, watching. He told himself it was a coincidence, just a weird customer, no big deal. But the next morning, she was waiting for him, not inside the shop, outside, near the back entrance. You look tired, she said softly, stepping closer. You should take better care of yourself. Jake felt his stomach turn. How did she know what time I get here? Trying to stay professional, he laughed it off. Yeah, long shift. Can I get you something? She just smiled. Not today. I just wanted to see you. Then she walked away. For the next week, she was there every day. If she wasn't inside, she was waiting outside. And then, one night, she wasn't outside the coffee shop anymore. She was outside his apartment. Jake saw her through his window, standing on the sidewalk, looking up at his building. He closed the blinds, trying to ignore it. Maybe if he didn't react, she'd get bored and move on. Then a text. From an unknown number. Your lights are still on. You should get some sleep, Jake. He froze. He had never given her his number. His heart pounded as he typed back, Who is this? No response. The next morning, when he arrived at work, his manager pulled him aside. Hey man, one of the girls from the morning shift found something weird taped to the back door. Thought you should see it. Jake followed him outside. His stomach dropped when he saw it. A picture of him, sleeping. It had been taken from outside his bedroom window. Jake quit his job that day, moved to a different apartment across town. But sometimes, late at night, he still gets texts from an unknown number. I miss our mornings together. The girl in the window. David lived on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building, the kind with creaky floors and thin walls where you could hear your neighbours arguing through the vents. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, and for a college student, that was enough. His window faced the alley, looking out at another apartment building. Across the way, in the unit directly opposite his, lived a girl he had never met. She was always there. Every night she sat in the window, staring out, never moving much, never closing the curtains. It became a weird routine. He'd come home, throw his bag down, glance outside, and she'd be there. At first, he thought maybe she was studying or waiting for someone. But after weeks of this, it started to unnerve him. Why was she always there? One night, David decided to wave, just to see if she'd react. She didn't. She just stared. That was the first time he felt something deeper than unease. Something cold. He tried to ignore it, stopped looking, told himself he was being paranoid. Until one evening, as he sat at his desk, his roommate Sean walked in, glanced out the window and froze. "Dude," Sean said slowly, "who the hell is that in your window?" David frowned. "What?" Sean pointed. David turned and his stomach dropped. It wasn't the girl's window Sean was pointing at. It was David's. Someone was standing behind him. He spun around, nothing. But when he looked back out the window, for the first time in weeks, the girl was gone. That night, David barely slept. Every creak, every whisper of wind sent his pulse racing. At 3:12 a.m., his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Why did you stop looking?" His breath caught. He hadn't given his number to anyone new. Slowly, heart pounding, he turned his head toward the window. And she was back. But this time, she wasn't sitting. She was standing. And her window wasn't across the alley anymore. It was right outside his room. The last stop. It was supposed to be a normal ride home. Jordan slumped in his seat at the back of the school bus, watching the streetlights blur past. 8:47 p.m. Too late for a school bus, but he had stayed late for detention, and this was the last route. Just him, the driver, and 3 other kids. He didn't recognize them. That was weird. His town wasn't big. He knew most of the kids who rode this bus. But these 3? Total strangers. One girl sat perfectly still, staring ahead without blinking. A boy behind her tapped his fingers rhythmically on his knee. The last kid, a boy in a hoodie, sat with his head down, never looking up. Jordan shifted uncomfortably. The driver hadn't said a word since he got on. The bus rolled down a dark, wooded road, not the usual route. Jordan leaned forward. This isn't my stop." The driver didn't react. Jordan's stomach tightened. "Hey, where are we going?" The girl in the front turned her head slowly, too slowly, and Jordan's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were completely black. So were the others. The tapping boy grinned, his mouth stretching too wide. The hooded kid finally lifted his head, revealing a sunken, hollowed face. Jordan shot to his feet. "Stop the bus!" The driver finally spoke, his voice low and cold. "Last stop." The bus screeched to a halt. The doors creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness outside. No houses, no streetlights, no roads. Just black, swirling emptiness. Jordan backed away as the 3 kids stood up in unison, walking toward him. The tapping boy whispered, "You were late, Jordan." The girl tilted her head. "You weren't supposed to be here." Jordan's pulse pounded. "What are you talking about?" The hooded boy smiled. "This bus is only for us." They lunged, and everything went black. Jordan woke up to the sound of his alarm. His bed. His room. Morning sunlight streaming through the window. A dream. Just a dream. He let out a breath of relief. until his phone buzzed. A message from his friend. "Dude, did you hear about the bus crash last night?" Jordan froze. "What bus crash?" his friend replied immediately. "The late route. It went off the road, no survivors." Jordan's blood ran cold. His friend sent one more message, a news article, photo of the wreckage, a list of the students who had been on board. His name was on it, but he was right here. Or was he? The librarian who never left Tyler was used to pulling all-nighters in the campus library. It was the only place quiet enough to study without distractions. But that night, as the clock struck 3 a.m., the silence felt wrong. The library had officially closed at midnight. But since he worked there part-time, he had the key. He had stayed behind to cram for an exam, surrounded by nothing but dusty bookshelves and flickering fluorescent lights. Then he heard it. Soft footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the restricted archives section. He froze. No one else should be here. "Hello?" he called. No answer. The sound stopped. Tyler exhaled, shaking his head, probably just the old pipe settling, but as he turned back to his laptop, a book slid off the shelf and hit the floor. He jumped, his pulse spiking. Slowly, he walked over and picked it up. An old ledger, thick with yellowed pages. His stomach dropped when he saw the name scrawled inside the cover. Margaret Holloway, head librarian, 1932 and 1968. He knew that name. Margaret Holloway had been the library's first head librarian. She had died in this very building over 50 years ago. Some said she never left. A chill ran down his spine. He turned to put the book back and froze. Down the aisle, past the dim shelves, a shadow moved. A tall, thin figure, dressed in a long, old-fashioned skirt, standing completely still. His breath hitched. The librarian. The stories had said she still walked the library, making sure no one broke the rules. Tyler took a step back. The figure didn't move, but the lights flickered, and a voice, a whisper, dry as old paper, filled the air. "Shh!" The sound came from right behind him. Tyler spun around, nothing, but when he turned back, the aisle was empty. The librarian was gone. His laptop snapped shut on its own. The message was clear. The library was closed, and he needed to leave. Tyler didn't argue. As he grabbed his bag and sprinted for the exit, he swore he heard it again. A whisper, low and cold, echoing through the empty shelves. "Shh." The library watcher. It started as a joke. A dumb, spooky rumor passed around campus about the third floor of the library, how students studying late at night would feel like they were being watched. Everyone had a version of the story. I swear I saw someone hiding between the shelves. I turned the corner and a guy was just standing there, staring. I heard breathing behind me, but no one was there. Nobody took it seriously, just another urban legend. Until Molly, Jake, and their friends decided to prove it was fake. 24-hour challenge, Jake said, grinning. We stay in the library overnight and see if anything happens. Molly hesitated. The library closed at midnight on weekdays. If they stayed past closing, they'd be trapped inside until morning. But the others were in. So, at 11:50 p.m, they hid in the back, crouched behind the dusty bookshelves, waiting for the security guard to lock up. At 12:15 a.m, they were alone. "Easy," Jake whispered. "Now we just hang out till sunrise." For the first hour, everything was fine. They laughed, explored, took pictures. Then the lights flickered. A small thing. Could have been nothing. But then they heard it. A chair scraping against the floor. They froze. Molly turned her phone flashlight toward the desks near the window. Nothing. Just empty chairs and silence. Then Jake whispered, "Where's Sam?" They all looked around. Sam had been right next to them. Now he was gone. "Sam," Molly hissed, "stop messing around." silence. Then, a footstep, soft where slow, from the end of the aisle. They turned their lights, just in time to see a shadow slip between the bookshelves, too tall to be Sam, too fast. Jake grabbed Molly's wrist. "Run!" They bolted for the exit, hearts pounding. Molly glanced back once. A mistake. Between the shelves, just beyond the dim emergency light, she saw him. A tall, grinning man in a librarian's uniform. But the library had been empty. No staff, no one but them. They yanked on the exit doors, locked. Then Sam's voice, weak and distant. "Help me." It came from the darkness beyond the shelves, but Sam's phone was buzzing on the floor right in front of them. He had never left it behind. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed a chair and smashed the glass. The alarms screamed as they ran outside. When security arrived, the guards were furious until they checked the cameras. Sam had walked away from the group alone. Then, at exactly 1:03 a.m., he had simply disappeared between the shelves. No one ever saw him again. And on the security feed, right before the footage cut to static, a man in a librarian's uniform turned to the camera and smiled. The man in the fog. The gas station was the only thing for miles. Nina had been driving for hours, heading to her cousin's house across state lines. The highway was empty, swallowed by thick fog. Her gas tank was nearly empty. She pulled into the station, an old, run-down place with flickering lights, no cars, no people, just a single attendant inside the small convenience store, staring at a tiny TV. Nina stepped out of her car, shivering. The air felt off, too still, too quiet. As she grabbed the pump, something moved in the fog. A tall, thin figure standing near the edge of the station's lights, watching. She squinted. "Hello?" No response. The gas station attendant didn't react. Nina's pulse quickened. She turned back to her car, pretending not to notice. Then she heard footsteps, crunching against the gravel. Getting closer. Heart pounding, she glanced over her shoulder. The man was gone. The fog was too thick now. It pressed against the gas station like a living thing. She hurried to finish pumping gas, hands shaking. Then, a voice, right behind her. "You shouldn't be here." Nina whirled around. No one. She stumbled back, chest heaving, her instincts screaming at her to run. The gas station door creaked open. The attendant finally looked at her. His face was pale, eyes wide. "Miss, get inside, now!" Nina hesitated. "What's going on?" He stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Don't turn around, just..." Too late. She had already turned and saw the man in the fog, standing inches from her. His face was wrong, stretched, hollow, no mouth, no eyes, just a void. The world tilted. The gas station vanished. The road disappeared. There was only fog. And then, Nina was back in her car. The gas station was gone. She was parked on the side of the highway, her gas tank full. Her phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number. "Don't stop next time." She threw the phone onto the passenger seat, turned the key, and sped away. She never stopped at a gas station after dark again, and in the fog, she never looked back. The man in the hotel hallway. Kevin had been on the road for hours. His company sent him to a conference in Chicago, and after a long day of networking, all he wanted was to crash in his hotel room, order room service, and sleep. The hotel wasn't anything special, just a business class place downtown. Clean, quiet, nothing unusual. At least that's what he thought. At around 11:30 p.m, as he settled into bed, he heard something. Tap, tap, tap. A slow, rhythmic knock at his door. He froze, listening. Not a normal knock, no voice calling out housekeeping or room service, just knocking. Cautiously, he got up and peered through the peephole. A man stood outside, tall, thin, dressed in a wrinkled suit. His face was pale, eyes sunken, and his mouth twisted into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Kevin's stomach turned. Tap, tap, tap. The man knocked again, head tilting slightly, as if he knew Kevin was watching. Kevin stepped back. He hadn't ordered anything, hadn't called for help. Whoever this was, he wasn't supposed to be there. A moment later, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Why won't you open the door, Kevin?" His breath caught. How did this guy know his name? Another knock. Harder this time. Kevin's hands shook as he dialed the front desk. The receptionist answered in a sleepy voice. "Front desk, how can I help you?" "There's a man outside my door," Kevin whispered. "He won't go away. I don't know who he is." Silence. Then, the receptionist said something that made Kevin's blood turn to ice. "Sir, are you sure? Security checked the floors 10 minutes ago. No one's there." Kevin's heart pounded. Slowly, he turned back to the peephole. The hallway was empty. No man, no sound. But when he looked down, he saw it. A small white envelope pushed under his door. His hands trembled as he picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 words, typed in neat black ink. "See you soon." Kevin checked out that night. He never found out who the man was, or how he knew his name. But sometimes, in new hotel rooms, late at night, he swears he still hears the knocking. Tap, tap, tap. The passenger in seat 19B, the plane was nearly empty. Danielle had lucked out, an entire row to herself on a red-eye flight from New York to Los Angeles. She settled in, ready to sleep through the 6-hour trip. The hum of the engines, the dim cabin lights, it was peaceful. Until she noticed something strange. The seatbelt sign was still on. They had been in the air for nearly an hour, but the captain hadn't turned it off. Weird. She glanced around. Most passengers were asleep. The flight attendants were nowhere in sight. Then, out of the corner of her eye, movement. The man in seat 19B was sitting completely still. She hadn't noticed him bored. Hadn't noticed him at all until now. He was dressed in an old suit, hands folded in his lap. But something was wrong. His skin looked grey, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. Danielle shifted uncomfortably. Maybe he was just sick. Then the turbulence hit. The plane shook violently, the cabin lights flickering. A few passengers stirred awake. Danielle gripped her armrest, her heart pounding. And then, the man in 19B turned his head. Not naturally. His entire neck twisted, like it was unhinged. Danielle's breath caught in her throat. His eyes were missing. Just dark, empty sockets. And then, he spoke. His voice was distorted, as if coming from a bad radio signal. "We never landed." The turbulence stopped. The cabin was eerily quiet. Danielle's chest tightened as she slowly turned to the other passengers. Every single seat was empty. She was alone. The plane engines roared louder, the walls around her seeming to stretch, distort. The man in 19B let out a slow, rattling breath. "You should have stayed asleep," Danielle screamed. And then she woke up, heart racing, sweat beading on her forehead. The plane was normal again, passengers asleep, flight attendants moving through the aisles. Just a nightmare. She exhaled, rubbing her eyes, until she turned and saw seat 19B was still empty. But the seatbelt was buckled, and in the seat tray, a boarding pass with her name on it. And the date? Yesterday. The plane had already landed. So why was she still here? The man in the vents. The first note appeared on Claire's kitchen counter. At first, she thought she had left it for herself and simply forgot. A small yellow sticky note with a rushed, uneven scrawl. "Lock your doors. Someone is watching." She chuckled nervously and tossed it in the trash. Maybe her roommate, Sarah, was playing a prank. But when she asked, Sarah swore she had nothing to do with it. The next night, another note appeared, this time on her bathroom mirror. "You forgot to lock the window." Claire felt a chill creep up her spine. Had she? She rushed to check the window. Sure enough, it was slightly open, though she didn't remember leaving it that way. She triple-checked every lock before going to bed that night. Then the third note came. "You're getting better, but I'm already inside." Claire's heart pounded as she read the words. She grabbed her phone, ready to call the police, but a sound stopped her. A soft, deliberate shuffle, coming from inside the air vent. Slowly, she turned toward the vent near the ceiling. The slats were slightly bent, the screws barely holding in place. Something was inside. She backed away, gripping her phone with trembling hands. But then she saw it. A single, bloodshot eye staring back at her through the vent. Claire screamed and bolted for the door, running straight into Sarah, who had just come home. The police arrived minutes later. They pried open the vent and found a small crawl space leading through the walls of the apartment. Inside, they discovered a makeshift bed, empty food wrappers, and dozens of notes, some never delivered. One of them read, "I love watching you sleep." The man was never found. The passenger who wasn't there. Lena had never been on a cruise before, but when her best friend Gina won a free trip, she couldn't say no. The Ocean Serenity was massive. 15 decks, pools, restaurants, even a casino. For the first 2 days, it was paradise. Sunbathing, fancy dinners, late-night drinks. Then Lena met him. It was their third night when she first saw him, standing at the railing, staring out at the sea, tall, thin, dressed in an old-fashioned black suit. At first, she thought he was a performer, maybe part of some dinner show, but something about him felt wrong. His skin was too pale, his lips never moved, and he never blinked. Still, she brushed it off. Maybe just an odd guest. Until Gina frowned at her over breakfast the next morning. "Who were you talking to last night?" Lena paused. "What?" "On the balcony, around 3 a.m. You were whispering to someone." Lena felt a chill creep up her spine. She had been asleep at 3 a.m. That night she locked her cabin door, but at exactly 3 a.m. something woke her. A soft knock on the balcony glass. Slowly she turned. And there he was, standing outside her cabin, but that was impossible. She was on the 9th deck. There was no ledge, nothing he could be standing on. She screamed, waking Gina, who ran to the door, only to find nothing, just empty ocean. The next morning, Lena went to guest services, describing the man. The woman behind the desk froze. Then, in a hushed voice, she pulled out a black and white photo from an old passenger log. The man in the suit. "You saw him?" the woman whispered. "That's not possible," Lena swallowed. "Why?" The woman hesitated, then leaned in. "Because he was a guest on this ship. But that was years ago." "And?" Lena asked, voice shaking. The woman's face was pale. "And he went overboard." That night, Lena didn't sleep. And at 3 a.m., when she heard the soft knocking on the glass again, she didn't look. But in the morning, when she finally opened the curtains, there was a wet handprint on the glass. The reflection, that wasn't mine. The suite was too perfect. Lena set her bags down, admiring the chandelier, the velvet furniture, the giant king-sized bed. The hotel was expensive, way out of her budget, but work was covering the trip. So she didn't argue. A massive, antique mirror stood against the far wall, its gold frame intricately carved with swirling designs. It dominated the room, and something about it felt off. Lena turned away from it, shaking the unease from her mind. She was just tired from the flight. But that night, things got weird. It started with the tapping. A light, rhythmic sound, like fingernails against glass. She sat up in bed, her breath caught in her throat. The mirror was right across from her. She swallowed. Maybe the building was settling. Maybe the reflection moved. Not her reflection, something else. Lena froze. She was sitting in bed. The reflection was standing, facing her. She squeezed her eyes shut. I'm dreaming. This isn't real. When she opened them, the reflection was right at the glass, smiling. Lena scrambled out of bed, shoving a chair in front of the mirror. She barely slept. In the morning, she convinced herself it was a hallucination, just exhaustion, but the chair was gone, and when she checked the mirror, there were handprints on the inside of the glass, not hers. Lena ran downstairs, demanding a new room. The front desk clerk paled. "Which room are you in?" she told them. The clerk exchanged a look with the manager. "Ma'am, that suite hasn't been booked in over a year." Lena shook her head. "What? No, my company reserved." The manager frowned. "That room was sealed off after a guest disappeared." Lena's stomach dropped. Disappeared? The clerk hesitated, then lowered their voice. "She was last seen in front of the mirror." Lena turned and ran. She checked out immediately, not bothering to pack. As she got in her cab, she glanced up at her hotel window one last time. Her reflection was still there, watching her go. The silent follower. The first time Rachel noticed him, she was on her usual morning run. She liked to keep a routine. Same park, same path, same time every morning before work. It was safe, full of dog walkers and other joggers. But today felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She glanced over her shoulder and saw a man jogging a few paces behind. He wasn't wearing typical running clothes, just jeans, a hoodie, and scuffed up sneakers. She told herself it was a coincidence, just someone passing through. But the next day, he was there again. Same outfit, same distance, never running ahead, never falling behind, just keeping pace. Rachel told herself not to panic, but she picked up speed, testing him. So did he. That's when she knew. She abruptly cut her run short, veering toward a busy street, ducking into a coffee shop. She watched through the window as he jogged past, his head moving side to side as if searching for her. She decided to change her routine. New route, different time. But a few days later, as she rounded a corner, there he was, waiting. Rachel's stomach dropped. He wasn't jogging anymore, just standing there, facing her. She turned on her heel and sprinted home, locking the door behind her. Maybe it was all in her head. Maybe she was overreacting. Then the notes started appearing, slipped under her door. "I love your ponytail. I know where you live now. You look beautiful when you run." Rachel called the police. They took a report but said, unless he had threatened her, there wasn't much they could do. That night she barely slept. Every sound outside made her heart race. At 2 a.m. she heard something new, a faint scratching at her front door. She crept to the peephole, barely breathing, and there he was, not knocking, not trying to break in, just standing there, his face inches from the peephole, staring. Rachel backed away, heart pounding. She called 911, her voice shaking. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They checked the security cameras. The footage showed him arriving hours earlier. He had stood outside her door for nearly 3 hours, waiting, watching. Rachel never ran that route again. The silent passenger. It was supposed to be a simple drive. An overnight haul from Denver to Salt Lake City. Nothing out of the ordinary for Mark Holloway, a seasoned trucker with 10 years of highway experience. He preferred the night shifts, less traffic, cooler air, and the silence of the open road. But on this night, something felt off from the moment he pulled onto the highway. Mark had done all his usual checks before departure. Fuel tank full, tyres inspected, cargo secured. He had even grabbed an extra thermos of coffee, anticipating the long stretch of darkness ahead. The hum of the engine was soothing, the yellow lines on the pavement hypnotic. He flicked on the radio, letting an old country song fill the cab, but his fingers tightened on the wheel as a strange feeling settled over him. He wasn't alone. He glanced at the empty passenger seat. The dim glow of the dashboard cast flickering shadows, but there was nothing there. Shaking his head, he forced a chuckle. "Get a grip, Holloway," he muttered. He blamed exhaustion, the endless monotony of the road playing tricks on his mind. Miles passed in silence. The trees lining the highway swayed in the wind, their branches clawing at the night sky. Mark rolled his shoulders, reaching for his thermos, when the CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker, breaker. Anyone got an eye on a black rig, late model Kenworth? Seen some odd activity around it?" Mark frowned and reached for the radio. "This is Holloway. You say a black Kenworth?" 10-4, buddy. Thinking someone's hitching a ride that ain't supposed to be." A cold shiver crept up Mark's spine. His Kenworth was black. He checked his side mirrors, expecting to see another vehicle trailing him, but the road behind was empty. "Where'd you spot it?" "Was just past Laramie, heading westbound." Something didn't sit right, looked like a figure inside the cab, but I didn't see no co-driver. Mark's stomach twisted. He hadn't stopped since Denver. No one could have gotten in. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "Probably just a shadow, partner, but I appreciate the heads up." The radio crackled again before fading into static. Mark set it down, keeping his eyes on the road. It was just a coincidence. Had to be. 2 hours passed without incident, but the unease never left. Every so often, he caught movement in his peripheral vision, but every time he turned his head, the seat was empty. His breathing grew unsteady. He reached for the thermos again, desperate for distraction, when he saw it. A shape in the passenger seat. His foot slammed the brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt as the truck shuddered to a stop. Heart hammering, he turned. Nothing. The seat was empty. The only sound was his own ragged breathing. He forced himself to move, checking the sleeper compartment behind him. No one was there. His hands trembled as he climbed back into the driver's seat, pressing his forehead against the wheel. Maybe he was more exhausted than he thought. He needed sleep, but he still had hours to go before his next stop. He took a deep breath and pulled back onto the road. The next time he saw movement, he didn't turn. He just kept driving, swallowing his fear and forcing himself to focus. The miles stretched endlessly, and the highway became an unbroken void. When he finally spotted a truck stop in the distance, relief flooded his chest. Pulling into a well-lit lot, he parked between 2 other rigs. The place was mostly empty, save for a couple of truckers chatting near the diner entrance. Mark locked his doors and made his way inside, needing a break from the eerie solitude of his cab. He ordered coffee and sat by the window, keeping his truck in sight. The radio inside played softly, a news anchor droning about an escaped convict last seen near the Wyoming-Colorado border. Mark barely listened, rubbing his temples. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He glanced up. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, poured more coffee into his mug. He exhaled a dry laugh. Something like that. "Long night?" she asked. "You could say that." She gave him a knowing look. "Lot of weird things happen on these roads at night. People see things." Mark hesitated. "You ever hear of hitchhikers appearing in rigs?" She frowned. "You mean the Phantom Rider?" A chill ran through him. "Phantom Rider?" She nodded. "Old story. Truckers say there's a ghost that hitches rides. Some say it's a lost soul, others say it's something worse. You see something in your cab? Mark swallowed hard. Thought I did. She studied him for a moment, then leaned in. If you see it again, don't stop. He stared. What? Just drive, she said. No matter what happens, don't stop. Don't let it know you see it. Mark left the diner unsettled. The other truckers had cleared out, leaving his rig alone under the fluorescent lights. As he climbed inside, he forced himself not to look at the passenger seat. His fingers gripped the wheel tighter than necessary as he pulled back onto the road. The night felt darker now. The headlights barely seemed to cut through the void ahead. The hum of the tyres became a rhythmic whisper beneath him. Then, the radio crackled. "Holloway!" a voice rasped through the speaker. His grip tightened. The CB was off. Slowly, his gaze flicked to the passenger seat. A figure sat there. Gaunt, sunken eyes locked onto his, a twisted grin stretching across a too-pale face. Mark's breath hitched, but he kept driving. He forced his eyes back on the road, heart hammering against his ribs. Don't stop. Don't let it know you see it. The thing in the seat shifted, leaning closer. A cold, decayed scent filled the cab. Mark fought every instinct screaming at him to run. His hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. The figure whispered, "Where are we going, driver?" He bit his tongue until he tasted blood. The road stretched on forever. The figure didn't move, only watching, waiting. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Mark gasped, his body trembling. His rig rumbled on, the highway endless before him. He didn't stop until he reached Salt Lake City, until he was safe in the blinding light of day. Mark never drove the night shift again. Melissa Carter had always loved the quiet suburban life. After years of city noise and crowded streets, moving to Briarwood felt like a dream. It was a town where people smiled at each other in passing, where kids rode their bikes in cul-de-sacs, and where neighbours knew each other by name. But it started with something small, something that didn't seem like much at first. The porch light was off when she came home. She distinctly remembered turning it on before she left for her evening jog. But when she pulled into the driveway, the bulb was dark. A small thing, easy to blame on the wind, a faulty switch, anything but something sinister. Then there were the noises, scraping against the back fence late at night. A light tap, tap, tap against the window when she was home, alone. The sound of footsteps outside her bedroom door, even when she knew she had locked it. It was just her imagination, she told herself. It had to be. A week later, the first letter arrived. No stamp, no return address, just a plain white envelope tucked between her bills. Inside was a single sheet of paper with only 3 words written in block letters. "I see you." Melissa's heart pounded. Maybe it was a prank? Kids from the neighborhood? She shoved the letter in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But then another came the next day. "I know where you sleep." She didn't sleep at all that night. She started noticing things that didn't belong. A footprint in the flower bed beneath her bedroom window. A chair moved slightly in the kitchen. A feeling, constant, nagging, that she was being watched. One night, as she sat curled up on her couch with a glass of wine, her phone buzzed. "Unknown number. Check your window." Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she turned her head. A shadow stood beneath the streetlight just beyond her front yard. Tall, still, watching. Melissa's hands trembled as she dialed 911. But by the time the police arrived, the figure was gone, leaving only footprints in the damp grass. The locks were changed, security cameras were installed, but nothing stopped it. She would wake up to find the doors unlocked, though she was sure she had secured them. Her toothbrush was wet when she hadn't used it. A faint scent of cologne in her house that wasn't hers. Then, one night, she heard it. The sound of breathing inside her closet. Heart hammering, she gripped the bedside lamp and stepped forward, forcing herself to throw the door open. Nothing. But the scent of cologne was stronger now. The police did what they could, patrols, a report, words of caution. But there was no proof, no evidence beyond her own fear. "It's probably just stress," one officer suggested. "Maybe you should stay with a friend for a while." But she had no family nearby, and she refused to let a stranger scare her out of her own home. That was her mistake. It was 2:43 a.m. when she woke to the creak of her bedroom door slowly swinging open. A shadowed figure stood in the doorway. Her scream caught in her throat as she lunged for the baseball bat she kept beside her bed. But before she could reach it, the figure stepped back, vanishing into the darkness of her hallway. She was out of bed in an instant, her fingers fumbling for her phone. The call to 911 was breathless, frantic, but when the police arrived, the intruder was gone, leaving only a single message scrawled on the hallway mirror in what looked like red lipstick: "You can't hide from me." Desperation led her to hire a private investigator. If the police wouldn't take her seriously, she had to take matters into her own hands. It took weeks, but finally there was a breakthrough. The cameras caught him. Melissa sat frozen as she watched the footage. A man, wearing a dark hoodie, slipping into her backyard at night. He moved with familiarity, like he knew her home, knew her. The investigator traced him back to an address only a few blocks away, a former repairman, one who had done maintenance on her house months ago. He had copied her keys. The night the police went to arrest him, he wasn't there. Melissa was told to stay at a friend's house. She did for one night, then two. Then she got a text. "Unknown number. You thought you could run?" Her blood turned to ice. That night she returned home, determined to face this nightmare head-on. She barricaded the doors, kept a knife by her bedside. But when she woke in the middle of the night, there was a breath against her cheek, a whisper: "I finally found you." She didn't have time to scream. When the police arrived hours later, the house was silent. Melissa was gone. The only sign she had been there was the open bedroom window, the curtains billowing in the cold night air, and a single handprint on the mirror, smudged from the inside. The Watcher in the water. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. Milo leaned against the railing of the cruise ship, staring at the dark waves below. It was past midnight, and most passengers were asleep. The ship's engines hummed softly, the only sound breaking the silence. But something felt wrong. The water was too still. No waves, no movement, just a vast, inky blackness. A sudden splash made Milo stiffen. He peered over the edge. Something was floating. At first, he thought it was a person, a pale face, dark, empty eyes staring up at him. His breath hitched. "Hey, are you okay?" No response. The thing just floated there, watching. Milo's stomach twisted. Then the face sank beneath the surface without making a ripple. Goosebumps crawled over his skin. That wasn't normal. He turned to leave and nearly collided with a crew member, a tall man in a crisp uniform. His face was too pale, his eyes too black. The man spoke softly. "You saw it, didn't you?" Milo swallowed hard. "Saw what?" The crew member didn't blink. "The Watcher." Milo's chest tightened. "What? What does that mean?" The man exhaled slowly. "It sees those who see it." Milo's pulse pounded. He glanced over the railing again. The face was back, closer this time, and then a hand emerged from the water, reaching, grabbing the railing. Milo staggered back. "What the?" The crew member grabbed his arm. His grip was ice cold. "You need to leave." Milo's voice shook. "Leave? I'm on a ship in the middle of the ocean." The man's expression darkened. "Then don't sleep." And just like that, he was gone, vanished. Milo turned back to the water. The face was right below him now, its mouth opened wide, too wide. And then everything went dark. Milo woke up in his cabin. His sheets were soaking wet. His door was locked from the outside. And on his mirror, written in smeared black water, "We see you." The ship never reported any missing passengers, but every night after that, Milo heard splashing outside his window, and he never, ever looked. The wrong address. The first package arrived on a Thursday. Lauren almost didn't notice it at first. A small brown box, unmarked, sitting on the edge of her apartment's communal mailbox area. The label was smudged, but she could barely make out an address. Her address, but the name was wrong. Shane Walters. She didn't know any Shane Walters, probably a delivery mistake. She left it there and went inside. The next day, another package arrived. Same size, same brown box, same name, but this time it was placed right in front of her apartment door. Lauren frowned. Had the delivery driver made a mistake, or was someone leaving these intentionally? She almost tossed it, but curiosity got the better of her. Carefully, she peeled back the tape and opened the box. Inside was a single Polaroid picture. Her, taken from outside her window. Lauren's stomach twisted. She lived on the 3rd floor. The next day, another package. No return address. Inside, another photo. This time, she was asleep in bed. The angle suggested it was taken from inside her apartment. Lauren called the police immediately, but they found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing to trace. "Could be a prank," the officer muttered. "Still, let us know if it happens again." That night she barely slept. Every creak in the walls, every shadow in the corner of her room made her skin crawl. She double-checked the locks, pushed a chair against the door. But even with her paranoia, exhaustion eventually won. Then, around 3 a.m., she woke with a start, a rustling sound, from the closet. She froze, barely breathing. Slowly, she reached for her phone on the nightstand and turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the closet door. The handle turned. Lauren screamed and bolted out of bed, running straight for the front door, yanking it open and sprinting into the hallway. Her neighbours came rushing out and someone called 911. When the police arrived and searched her apartment, they found him. A man curled up inside the closet, clutching a camera. He had been living in her attic crawlspace for weeks. And beside him, a pile of undelivered packages. Every single one contained a picture of her, each taken from a closer and closer distance. Vanishing point. Elena had always been careful. She locked her doors, stayed aware of her surroundings, and never walked alone at night. But caution only did so much when someone truly wanted to watch you. It started with a feeling, that creeping sensation of unseen eyes tracing the curve of her back as she walked home from work. The shiver at the base of her neck when she stepped into her dimly lit apartment. At first, she convinced herself it was nothing, just paranoia. Just the weight of working late shifts at the diner, exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. Then she noticed the notes. They weren't threatening at first. Just small, folded scraps of paper tucked into her mailbox or slipped beneath her door. "You look beautiful today. I love the way you smile." Sweet, almost innocent, almost. But innocence doesn't come in the form of unsigned notes from someone who shouldn't know where you live. She tried to brush it off. Maybe a customer who had a crush on her, maybe a harmless admirer. But when the notes kept coming, always watching, always knowing, you shouldn't walk alone. That dress was perfect on you. The unease settled deep into her bones. One night, as she stepped out of the diner at the end of her shift, she hesitated. The street was empty, save for a few scattered cars, their headlights slicing through the cold night. Her breath curled in the air as she pulled her jacket tight around her. Then she saw him. a shadow at the edge of the parking lot, not moving, just standing. She couldn't see his face, but the presence was enough. Her pulse roared in her ears as she hurried to her car, locking the doors the moment she slipped inside. By the time she glanced back, the figure was gone. Eleanor drove home that night with white-knuckled fingers gripping the wheel. The next morning, another note appeared. "I saw you last night. You looked scared." She told herself she wouldn't let fear win. She wouldn't change her routine. But she couldn't ignore the nagging paranoia anymore. She started varying her route home, taking different streets, switching up her schedule at the diner. It didn't matter. The notes kept coming. The figure kept appearing. She confided in her co-worker, Lacey, who didn't hesitate to call the police on her behalf. They listened, nodded, took notes. But without tangible proof, without a name, a face, there was little they could do. "You should get a security system," one of the officers suggested. "Maybe a camera." So she did. She installed a camera outside her front door, set her phone to alert her at the slightest motion. That night, she barely slept. Every creak of the apartment sent her heart hammering. When her phone finally buzzed with a motion alert, she bolted upright in bed. Hands shaking, she opened the app. The feed flickered to life, showing the grainy, black and white image of her doorstep. Nothing. She exhaled, running a hand through her hair. Maybe a cat, maybe a branch moving in the wind. But just as she was about to turn it off, the motion caught her eye. A figure, right at the edge of the frame, just standing. She scrambled to dial the police, whispering her address into the receiver as if the stalker might hear through the walls. The officers arrived within minutes, but once again, whoever it was had vanished into the night. She tried to convince herself she was still safe. That whoever he was just a coward hiding in the dark. Until she woke up to find her bedroom window unlocked. She didn't remember leaving it open. The latch was old, but sturdy. And yet, it clicked open too easily when she tested it with trembling fingers. A fresh note lay on the windowsill. "You forgot to lock up last night. Be more careful." Panic surged through her as she shoved the window shut and called the police again. This time, they took her seriously. They swept the apartment, checked for signs of forced entry. Nothing. No fingerprints, no signs of struggle. Just a lingering scent of something unfamiliar, masculine. Someone had been in her home. Her landlord changed the locks the next morning, but locks meant nothing to someone who had already found a way inside. Days passed without incident. No more notes, no more figures in the dark. Elena wanted to believe it was over. Maybe the increased police presence had scared him off. Maybe he'd finally lost interest. Then came the phone call. A blocked number, a voice distorted, almost playful. "You've been avoiding me." Eleanor's stomach clenched. She didn't respond, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles ached. "I miss you." The line went dead. She barely had time to process the terror before her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture of her, taken from inside her apartment. The police arrived within minutes, but again, there was no sign of forced entry, no trace of an intruder, only Eleanor's shaking hands and the proof on her phone that someone, somewhere, was playing a game with her life. The next few days blurred together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. She moved in with Lacey, refusing to step foot in her apartment alone. She bought pepper spray, considered getting a gun, but nothing settled the unease in her gut. Nothing erased the knowledge that someone, somewhere, was watching. The final note arrived on a cold Sunday evening, slipped beneath the door of Lacey's apartment. "You can run, but I always find you." That night, Eleanor didn't sleep, neither did Lacey. They took turns keeping watch, every sound an omen, every shadow a threat. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Not a loud, demanding knock, just a soft, patient tap. like someone politely requesting entrance. Lacey reached for the baseball bat she had tucked beside the couch. Eleanor gripped the knife she had taken from the kitchen. Another knock. Neither of them moved. Then the handle rattled. Lacey lunged for her phone, dialing 911 with shaky fingers. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched on, so thick it felt suffocating. Then, the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. By the time the police arrived, the hallway was empty. But the camera Lacey had set up outside caught him, a man. Wearing a dark hoodie, face obscured. Standing there for minutes before he knocked, just waiting. They never found him. But Eleanor moved across the country the next week. New city, new job, new life. She changed her number, her name, left everything behind. For months there was nothing, no notes, no calls, no shadows lurking in the dark. Then, one evening, she came home to her new apartment, exhausted from work, ready to finally breathe again. A single envelope lay on her kitchen counter, no stamp, no return address. I found you. Thank you for joining me in this little corner of storytelling darkness. If any of my tales manage to amuse, unsettle, or make you question your life choices, feel free to like and subscribe. It's not like the Void Minds Company, or does it?